Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the election edition of the Tatiana Show. By the time that you're listening to this, we'll probably be a nation of people in chaos because I don't know what's going to happen with this election, but to bring a little bit of peace of mind and a little bit of a focused background to the ideas of liberty, I'm joined today by Bretigne Shaffer. Hey, Bretigne, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining us on the show today. So I've been seeing your writing everywhere. My friend Jennifer January on Facebook is a huge fan. She's always posting your stuff. I always see you interacting with Kevin McKernan, another freedom-loving member of our community. And you're obviously writing about a lot of things that are very topical. So before we get started, maybe you could give my audience an introduction to a little bit about who you are and what you're doing in this world today.
Yeah, sure. So many years ago, I was a journalist. I mostly in Asia. I lived in Hong Kong for a long time and wrote on political economic topics there. Have been back in the States for 20 years now. And I'm married, I have kids, I have 2 kids, I homeschool. Our daughter has special needs, so I do special needs homeschooling. And I am trying to focus on fiction. I'm just going to show you. So this is my latest, I write fiction now. This is my latest work, Annabel Pickering and Sky Pirates. It's a steampunk novel for kids, but it's really about teaching independent thinking and I shouldn't say teaching because I don't want it to be sort of pedantic, but it's a very, very libertarian work for kids. And I say trying to focus on fiction because, you know, once I finished that, the world started sort of imploding. And so I've been I feel like, you know, there's stuff I kind of have to write about, the whole COVID nonsense and everything. So I have been writing a lot about the pandemic and about sort of what I see as the bigger picture there on a couple different levels. But I'm really eager to get back to writing fiction. I just wanted to show you my other one. Urban Yogini is a comic book. It's a superhero who can't use violence. And it's all about how to be a real superhero and fight the violence of the state, which is what it turns out to be most of the time, without resorting to violence oneself. So that's what I'm doing these days. And I'm a longtime libertarian. I was raised by anarchists. So, you know, my dad was Butler Shaffer, who passed away last December. And he's pretty well known in the libertarian community. So I came into it pretty early. I was raised with this stuff and then got out into the world and had to sort of figure out where, you know, what the rest of the world thought and deal with that and engage with that. So yeah, I've been doing this for a long time.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a really interesting background. And I'm happy to see that you're doing books that are kind of, I guess, suggesting these ideas because I don't think that always happens. I'm waiting for my niece and nephew to be old enough to start getting them those kinds of books because their mom is a little bit off the rails. So I need to give them a little bit of a freedom influence. Like you talk about COVID and I talk about my sister-in-law who I'm, you know, very upset with. So she is now fully not letting the children hug another or touch another human being until after her and my brother get a vaccine. But because, you know, they're very cautious, they're not going to get the first round of vaccines. So that means that their children are not going to have human contact for over a year. And this is supposed to be for their own good. What has happened to the world around us that this is the state of affairs?
It's craziness. And part of it is, so one thing that I've written about a little bit recently is what I see as a battle of paradigms. And this, I'll just call it for for briefness' sake, the germ theory paradigm. And that whole, it's the pharmaceutical industry's paradigm. It's a paradigm that's been kind of rammed down our throats really for decades. If you talk to older people, the ones who remember what it's like to go out and, lick mud and wrestle with pigs and, be out in the world and exposing yourself to pathogens all the time, they will think it's ridiculous. But the reality is this paradigm of us versus the germs is one that kind of began about 100 years ago. And I won't go into the whole history of all that, but it's basically—
I want to know the history. The history sounds good.
Okay,
We don't have to go too deep, but give us some history. I like history.
Okay, so basically in the sort of mid-19th century, there were a few different schools of thought with regard to medicine. There was homeopathy. There was what's called the botanicals, and that's kind of like herbal medicine. And that was— my understanding of it is that the botanicals also encompass things like Native American. I'm talking about in America, because worldwide there was other stuff going on, but I think it also encompassed Native American traditional healing and that kind of thing. So there were kind of these three and then the third one is the roots of what we consider conventional medicine now. And what that was at the time was and means that was kind of unstable. So I hope I don't— the basis for what's called allopathic medicine. And the allopaths, they started taking things from the botanicals, and the homeopaths, they started taking plant-based medicines, or creating plant-based medicines based on what these other guys already knew. But in the marketplace, they weren't winning. People were paying more for homeopaths. They were getting better business. And these guys, so when they started taking started making these new medicines, they patented them, and they were called patent medicine. You've heard about the patent medicine sellers who, went from town to town selling their stuff. That was these guys. And what they did was they got together and they said, hey, we don't like that we're being out competed. We'd like to, grab this territory for ourselves. Let's buy some politicians, essentially. So they did a number of things. They kind of bought— that's when they started buying up the political, the healthcare system, if you— very broadly speaking. So the AMA was founded and started putting restrictions on what doctors could and couldn't do. There was this thing called the Flexner Report, where they went in and they, again, this was funded by this group of people.
Wasn't it the Rockefellers? Wasn't it because they found that oil can be made into synthetic medicine, so that's why they had such an interest in it? Or do you think it's an oversimplification?
That might be one angle on it. I don't really know much about the oil angle of it. Yes, the Rockefellers were involved, but I don't know much about the oil angle. That might be the case. I don't know, so I'm not going to speak to that. But basically, they what the Flexner Report did was it went around to all the hospitals, the hospitals and the medical schools, and said, okay, this one meets our standards, this one doesn't meet our standards, this one's, we're going to shut all these down, the ones that we say are not up to par. But by sheer coincidence, all the ones they shut down were the schools teaching homeopathy, and the schools and hospitals that were where they were teaching women. So there were separate, there were medical schools where it was like exclusively women. Well, those ones didn't meet their standards, so a lot of those got shut down. Same with African Americans. A lot of the hospitals and the medical schools that were solely, that were founded by African Americans and were, exclusively being used by them, they didn't meet the standards, so they were shut down too. So by sheer coincidence, it ended up solidifying the allopathic— I hate to say this because I'm I don't want anyone to get the impression that I'm woke, but it's really solidified the allopathic white male domination in medicine at that time. And then there was more to it. I mean, the whole patent angle. The reason they were able to buy the politicians was that you could patent their medicines. You can't patent herbal medicine. You can't patent garlic. You can't patent homeopathy. They're natural treatments that, you're not going to see the same kind of economies with those. You're not going to see the same level of profits with those. So that gave them a certain kind of power. It's not right to say that it's market power, because in the marketplace, they were not doing as well as these other practitioners, but because they were able to patent their stuff, they could charge more. I mean, we see the fruits of that today. So that's kind of where this all started. And it's really, there's a fundamental difference between the different views. And to oversimplify, I'm oversimplifying here, it's kind of a holistic view on the one side, and I want to call it an antagonistic view on the other, where with germ theory, and I'll give an example, with germ theory, it's really a view that we are at odds with nature, and we're at odds with the pathogens in our environment, and we need to do everything we can to shut them out. That's how we survive. That's, they're very, very dangerous, and we just need to protect ourselves from them. Mm-hmm. The other theory that developed in the late 19th century, I probably don't have my dates right here, but so Louis Pasteur is famous for working on the germ theory. Béchamp was a contemporary of his, and he developed the theory, what he called the terrain theory. And that theory basically says that what really matters in terms of our health and being strong and being able to function in the world is the terrain of our body. So our immune system, our overall constitution, all the things that we have in place to protect ourselves from any kind of, from pathogens, et cetera, et cetera. And what's interesting is that now, to sort of bring this back to where we are now, what we're seeing with COVID-19 is a few things. So one thing that's very striking is people with adequate or higher levels of vitamin D fare better with COVID-19. There's studies showing that, you take a bunch of people who have it, who've been infected, and who are actual cases, not positive test results, but actual cases. And the ones whose vitamin D levels are substandard do much worse, are more likely to die, are more likely to be hospitalized, intubated, that sort of thing. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we're seeing now that there was this whole controversy about antibodies, and people were saying, we're not reaching herd immunity because the antibody, when we test people for antibodies, those counts are very low. Well, there are a couple things about that, but one of them is that antibodies are not the only they're not the only part of our immune system. There's also T cell immunity, which is something that there are a number of studies now looking at that and showing that, there is T cell immunity to COVID-19, and people who've been exposed to previous coronaviruses have T cell immunity to those coronaviruses, which are helping them fight COVID-19. So if you have been, it flies in the face of the isolate yourself from all the germs and keep yourself in your basement and, hide and cover yourself in plastic and don't let your kids touch other kids. Because it's the people who went out and, were exposed to viruses and developed the immunity to those, they have the better defenses now against COVID-19, and also, presumably against other future mutations and future viruses that might come in the future. So that's kind of a long-winded way of just trying to describe this. It's really a paradigm clash. And we've been inundated over the last couple decades, especially, I think, with literal propaganda often in the form of mainstream news articles, telling us that, we need a vaccine to be protected. We need pharma solutions to be healthy and to be safe. And that, these germs out there are the enemy. That's the danger we need to fear. And it's what we've been fed is this paradigm. And now with COVID-19, I feel like it's really coming to a clash, because from my point of view, the flaws in that paradigm are really being revealed. And then there are people like, I don't want to point out your sister, but your sister who, people who are just, history will look back at some of the things people did during this time, and they'll say those people were completely nuts. They'll put them in the same drawer as the people who were afraid of witches, and just look at, this is insanity. So it's like it's reached this peak. It's sort of taken this germ theory paradigm taken to the extreme is what we're living through now. And the good news about that is that it reveals how crazy it is taken to the extreme. And we're also seeing some of the flaws, some of the cracks in that paradigm. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a mess out there, and it's very difficult to have communication with people. And people don't believe you. Like, I could show my sister-in-law different kinds of studies. I do a lot of different podcasts. I have a lot of intelligent friends with science background. I have a PPE specialist friend. She's always making videos. I'm sure you've seen Kristen Megan. And, so she's saying that the masks are not doing anything, that they're actually worse. I've been hearing about how if you basically are breathing in your own air all day, you're giving yourself brain damage. And yet I go outside and I see people with no one, as far as the eye can see, all by themselves in their full glory, just wearing their mask. They're so pleased with themselves because they're the kind person, and I'm selfish and I'm terrible. So, I mean, I feel like there's been a complete suspension of logic. How do we move forward from that point? Because, I mean, are they just all going to have to die because they're so stupid and Darwin is going to take care of it for us? Like, what are we supposed to do under these circumstances? Because I would like to see my niece and nephew. And I have thought a lot about maybe wishing her dead. But at the end of the day, I don't really want her to die, the mom. Right. Even though she's blocking.
It's not healthy for you to wish other people dead either.
No, I heard that that's true. I'm not so sure that I'm subscribing to that, but fine. We'll go along with this. I'm not going to wish her dead. The kids would be very sad. I could maybe steal them at that point, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to go over well. So let's move past this random fantasy. Yeah. What are we supposed to do about these people? Like, how are people going to come together if I show somebody a scientific study and then they say, you don't believe in science, and then they put a muzzle diaper over their face that's been on the floor of their car for a couple hours? I mean, it's completely idiotic. What am I supposed to do? What are we going to do in order to not murder these people?
That's the big question. Yeah, because, and most of the time I post stuff, I'll put it on my blog, I do my podcast, I try to get the information out there. But for the most part, I don't try and reason with the people who are living in fear, because you can't argue with fear. You just, you're if that's really where they're coming from. I mean, if it's someone who, and it's hard to tell because if all you see is the mask and the reaction is, it's sometimes hard to tell where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. But if somebody who's like reasoned conclusion and you feel like that's one thing, but so much of what's out there is just pure fear. So the professor who has been getting into trouble because he talked about masks in his university class on propaganda, and we talked about this a little bit. It's so, these tactics have worked in the past, and we know they worked in the past. We look back at, Nazi Germany and Maoist China and all these places, and we say, oh God, either those people were so stupid, or, how did they get all those people to go along with that? And but now we know better. We're seeing now that we don't know better. We're seeing now that the same tactics, the the creation of fear, and I don't mean the creation of the virus, I'm not saying the virus doesn't exist, but the manufacture of this fear around it, it's inherently divisive, because you're going to have the people who are more skeptical and look at what's going on and say, no, this doesn't make sense to me. And then you're going to have a whole lot of other people who just are going to go along with what the MSM tells them, or what Fauci tells them, or whoever it's basically, I think it's people who've given over their powers of reason to some other authority. And that's so deadly for society, to have a lot of people who are willing to do that, or who've been trained to do that, is deadly, because the reality is, when you're then in a situation where that fear is unleashed, you can't reason with them, because they're not people who are used to reasoning. They're people who are going to say, but Fauci says, or CNN says, or they've already handed over their powers of discernment to some other entity. So I don't know. I don't really have an answer. Maybe with time it'll get better. Maybe the more, I just see it's an avalanche of data now showing that the lockdowns didn't do anything. It's another question as to whether they should have, whether that's even a sensible policy to implement, which I don't think it is. But let's say it is, didn't help, didn't work. The masks doesn't look like, in some situations, yes. In some isolated situations, it looks like they do make a difference, but certainly not walking down the street, or driving your car, all of this, or even really in a supermarket, things like that. So there's all this evidence coming out, and data about the case-demic, and how cases are being manipulated, how the numbers are being manipulated, and how they're trying to create this second wave. And we know how they're doing it, and you can look at the people. I mean, there's some awesome people on Twitter. I'm sure you've seen them, like Ethical Skeptic and those guys, who've done some really in-depth analysis of the numbers and of the manipulation of the numbers. So the information's out there. It's just, I feel like, here's what we're given is there's huge mass of people who aren't going to question, what the official sources are saying, who aren't going to listen to us. It's doesn't make sense to keep banging our head on that wall and lose friendships and all that stuff, because they're not, if that's the way they're operating, they're not going to listen. So the question then is, what do we do given that we're not going to get the majority on our side, at least not now? So what solutions can we come up with that don't depend on convincing everybody? And this is the dilemma of libertarians all the time, because, when have we ever had the majority agreeing with us? So it's up to us to come up with new technologies, maybe, or new legal structures, or some, solutions that don't depend on getting everybody on our train.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's any kind of way to do that, because I don't know, like, I've asked my mask friends, and I said, so, like, when are you going to take off the mask? And they hate that question. They can't handle it. They're like infuriated. And people are like, oh, well, there's all these new cases. I'm like, well, how are the deaths? There's all these new cases. And it doesn't even matter. I've literally lost, like, I don't know, at least half of my friends over this, and I think that, I've likened it to Nazi Germany before. My family is Polish. My mom's from Warsaw. So we were always kind of threatened with World War II stories and stuff. And I do think it's just like, people wonder, how did the Nazis get to be the Nazis? And it's like, because of this kind of stuff right now. And then on top of it, you have the election, as if that's so important. I mean, to be fair, I actually do think that this election is more important than other ones, but I hate that I've subscribed to this concept in the first place, because in 2016, I was spared the torture of watching the presidential elections. It was great. I just watched by the sidelines eating popcorn and laughing, because when I saw what happened in 2012 with Ron Paul, I saw that they're basically breaking their own rules. The RNC, just like the DNC, is a bunch of cheaters. So this isn't an election. And I find it very annoying that people think that this is that influential on their life, because by them complying with that mental state, then they're just propagating it, right? I've always been kind of on the fence, like, should I vote? Should I not vote? Because, there is a very good case to be made that by voting, it's immoral, because you're putting your views onto other people. You're allowing for a ruler to rule over people that they don't really want to rule over them. And you're implying that we need a ruler in the first place, where, I mean, I don't really think that the government is doing such a great job with this. Something that we had talked about a little bit offline before we got into this was the idea more broadly of, should the government be in charge of this kind of thing? What would you say to that? Because people are, the government DMV is bad enough. They haven't done a great job with COVID at all. So can you speak to that a little bit more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, so that's another big issue for me is that there's this unspoken assumption, and it's kind of horrifying to watch it unfold. This unspoken assumption that when there's a crisis, so let's assume that COVID-19 is actually a crisis. Let's assume that this is a really terrifying virus, and we really do need to do something about it, and it's threatening to a lot of people. Why does it then follow that we want the government to be in charge of that solution? It's astounding to me how few people are even questioning that, because, and especially, even within libertarian circles, you hear a little of this sort of acceptance. Well, that, it's obviously, and it's the government's terrain to make these decisions. Now let's figure out what the best decisions are. No, why are you accepting that this is something the government should be doing in the first place? And I think in hindsight, we're going to look back at this and see, every step of the way, state involvement has screwed things up massively. I mean, from the CDC control of testing at the beginning, which they completely screwed up, to, forcing patients with COVID-19 into nursing homes, which I think is really nothing short of murder, to the lockdowns, to the, which is also, it's cost businesses, it's cost people's livelihoods, it's costing lives. Latest estimate I saw is 10,000 additional children per month will die in the third world because of the lockdowns. I hope that's wrong. I hope that projection is as wrong as the Imperial College projections were. But every step of the way, everything we can see the government doing, it's massively screwing up. It's demonstrating what we've been saying forever, which is centralized solutions make things worse. Centralized planning leads to disaster. Centralized economic decision-making leads to humanitarian disaster. And it's just astonishing to me that a lot of people recognize that sort of in most spheres of life. I should say a lot of libertarians recognize that in most spheres of life, in the economy. It's obvious. You look at the Soviet Union, you look at Maoist China, look at Cambodia, all these places where they've had central planning. It's not just that it doesn't work, it's that it kills people. And yet, for some reason, people aren't seeing that the same forces are at play when we're talking about health and when we're talking about medicine. More so, in fact, because it's, lives are directly on the line. So it's crazy to me. And then, and the good news is there are countries we can compare to. So like, if you look at South Korea, which has a much less interventionist system with regard to hospitals. So like 90% of hospitals in South Korea are private. And they were able to, from the beginning, they coordinated with each other. They worked very well. They never had hospital overload, and they isolated the COVID patients in certain hospitals. So they didn't shut down entire hospitals and say, no, you can't get your cancer surgery because there are COVID patients now. They didn't have that nonsense. It was more of a decentralized approach, more of a decentralized system to start out with, and so they didn't get the massive. I mean, how insane is it to have centralized authorities able to say, no, you guys have to, we're treating COVID-19 as the priority now, and you've got to deprioritize everything else. It's nuts. It's just, and that goes through so many layers of our healthcare system. Our healthcare in the US is so centralized and so controlled. And the fact that nobody questions that it's just, somehow, I think it's this myth of public health. When you put the term public health on something, I think a lot of people assume that means it's in a different world from other human action and human activities. And it's not. It's, these decisions, when decisions are able to be made by individuals who A, know their preferences, B, know their circumstances, and C, have skin in the game, actually have accountability, we already know things are going to work out much better than when decisions are made by people who are outside, looking at it from above, and who don't really have skin in the game, who aren't going to, Cuomo doesn't lose much when thousands of people in nursing homes die because of his decision. There's no accountability there. There's no real reason for him to be making good decisions. So those same principles, the principles that we apply in the world of economics, absolutely applies here. And it's just surprising to me that more people don't recognize that.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot of surprises. I feel like my tinfoil hat is getting a lot of use this year, and it's like there's a lot of redemption there. What do you think is going to happen with the whole vaccine thing? Because, I have a lot of friends who are, they want informed consent. I think that's the expression. Anyway, they basically want people to actually know what their vaccines are. Some might call them anti-vaxxer, but I wouldn't say that that's an accurate statement because they're not necessarily against all vaccines. I don't know a ton about vaccines, but I do know that it's my body and my choice. So I don't understand why that doesn't apply. If I can kill, just a clump of cells that somehow turns into a person, but we're just going to pretend it's a clump of cells, which that's like a whole other can of worms. I'm still pro-choice, but at the same time, abortion isn't like a great thing, right? Let's call it what it is. And so I just find it surprising that there's that, pro-vaccine, but it's okay to kill a baby inside my belly. Like, how do you make that happen? So do you think that we're going to see some, some clashing there, like in terms of logic? Because somebody's got to bring that up at some point. And is there going to be any accountability, or are we just capitulating to the shrieking harpies on the left? Because that's what it feels like, and it's very annoying.
Good summation. So this is also something that's been going on for a while, and I've been following and writing about the vaxxer, anti-vaxxer war. This is another conflict that's been manufactured by the people who want to sell you the vaccines. Mm-hmm. And they've created a narrative. This is the predate COVID-19. They tried to focus on measles, which is kind of laughable because when the vaccine for measles was actually developed, mortality from measles had dropped to such a low extent. It did used to kill a lot of people back before we had good sanitation and good nutritional standards and hygiene and all that stuff. And in the third world, where if you don't have those things, a benign infection like measles can still be deadly. But by the time they wanted to develop a vaccine, the mortality rate was so low that some scientists from the CDC actually had to write a paper justifying why they were doing this, because the perception was everyone gets measles, and really kind of everyone did. It was like 90% of people got over it, and it was just considered a rite of passage. And so they had to write this paper justifying why they were going to develop a vaccine for this thing that nobody was really worried about. And in the end, it's funny, their conclusion, it's literally something like, they make the allusion to why climb mountains. And they said, well, because it's there. And they said, we're developing a vaccine because we can. So that's, to me, that's a little bit where this whole thing, it didn't start there. It didn't start there, but that was kind of a turning point where we started getting this inundation of, I'm just going to call it propaganda because that's what it is, telling us that we can't be healthy without vaccines, that we need to be afraid of all these things that in the past we weren't afraid of. And more recently, I would say in the last 20 years, but more so in the last 10 years, this idea that if you're not vaccinated, you are aggressing against other people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like this huge, and that's going to come up here with COVID-19, with the new vaccine. And it's a good thing that it is, because it's a deeply flawed position and it needs to be out in the open so we can tear it apart. Because, and leaving aside all the technical issues, there are a lot of problems specific to the COVID-19 vaccine, to developing a COVID-19 vaccine. And those are getting aired now too. And I always make the mistake of assuming that everybody else is seeing the same information I'm seeing, because it's out there. It's not even, you don't even have to dig that much for it. But there's even in sort of quasi-mainstream press, there's information about, attempts to develop a vaccine for previous coronaviruses and the serious problems they ran into. Because what happened was when they tested it on animals, and at first it seemed like the animals were fine. They didn't have any immediate reactions, and they developed antibodies. So it looked great until they were exposed to the coronavirus, and then they had a much worse reaction. They had serious lung pathologies when they were exposed to the virus that they were supposedly being vaccinated against. So they stopped developing those vaccines, for very good reason. But that problem still exists, and we're not, in the real mains, the MSNBC and that stuff, we're not really hearing much about that. But the information's there. So there's that. There are other issues. But all that aside, the bigger issue is, as you said, it's my body, my choice. Are we going to live in a society where people who don't subscribe to the germ theory view of the world, who don't believe that the way to be healthy and the way to live is to shut ourselves off, wrap ourselves in plastic, isolate our kids, and get vaccinated for every possible pathogen we might encounter, or any pathogen, there are those of us who don't subscribe to that paradigm, to that worldview. So, the other worldview is trying to get, and has been pretty successful actually, because there are a lot of people who buy into this now, to buy into the idea that if you don't subscribe to that worldview, if you don't take every precaution, if you don't get a vaccine, if you don't wear the mask, you are aggressing on everyone around you. And the problem, one of many problems with that, is that it turns thousands of years of human evolution and human history and human society on its head, because we have always progressed by interacting with each other, sharing pathogens to some extent, not exchanging Ebola-laden blood, but with respiratory viruses and with most of the pathogens that are out there, it's never been considered an assault on someone else to exchange pathogens, to have someone catch, the flu or measles or chickenpox from someone else. That's a narrative that certain people are trying to push and are trying to get everyone to accept. But I think my suspicion with COVID-19, as everything becomes more and more crazy, I think that narrative's going to fall apart, because it's not built on a solid foundation. And the more people start to look at what they're actually saying, the more they're going to see how ridiculous that is.
Yeah, I only worry that the people that are in power are the ones that are basically looking to crush all of our lives, right? And so I just don't really feel like logic and all that has much of an impact. You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't care. I don't know. I mean, honestly, the whole thing, it's very, very disturbing, because I don't think that I can tell what the end game here is. You can look at things on the surface and say, oh, the government, they're just trying to help us. But then you look at things like Agenda 21 and the just a lot of these kind of globalist plans. I hate to sound like Alex Jones, but man, that guy's really spot on these days.
Right.
So you know, what is the objective? Do they want, you know, people to keep fighting against one another? I mean, people started becoming almost classist now. You know, I'll have a friend and I was supposed to visit her and she says, well, my friends said that they saw your Facebook posts and they're very concerned about your mask stuff. And I'm like, okay, so your friends who are not going to be at your house, who are not going to interact with me, felt the need to call you and let you know that I'm anti-mask. Do you guys like understand how messed up that is? And then she's like, well, I don't know who you've been with. And it's like, what are you talking about? Since when are we just looking at people like disease bags? Unless I'm sleeping with somebody, I don't normally just look at somebody at the counter and say, they look like they're infested. I mean, what the hell is that about humanity? And then there's the whole idea that now we have to track everybody. And if you don't get the vaccine, you're not going to be able to travel.
Right.
Like what? No, I don't want to take a vaccine. I don't want to take, frankly, I don't want to take a COVID test. I took one, but I don't want to take a COVID test. And now there's all these incentives. Oh, well, in United Airlines, they're going to have rapid testing for COVID. Well, I'm glad that the COVID people are getting paid for those tests. And what about people that just have had a regular old sickness and now it's coming up because apparently these tests are not that accurate?
There are a lot of problems with the test. Yeah, Kevin's talked about that a lot. Yeah, and I don't even want to get into all the details with that, but yeah, and he also, it's interesting because I had him on my show a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about not only are the tests not, or the PCR tests, the way they're being used, not very accurate. There is a very cheap and simple way to get rid of one of the big problems. So one of the big problems is the test doesn't tell you whether the virus, the viral load that that it's picking up is live or is dead. So whether the person is infective or not, is able to infect other people or not. What Kevin says is there's a very easy and cheap way to solve that problem. But there's not an incentive for the people who are making all this money from all the tests. And once there's contact tracing, you get more tests. Each time you get a positive, oh, that's 5 more.
Oh my God, that's a nightmare.
There's no incentive. There's a perverse incentive to keep going with a flawed test. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the people who are inflicting this on us don't care about logic and don't care what's right or wrong. And a lot of the people who are going along with it also are just, I think, because they've been so inculcated with fear, you're not going to get through to them. So that doesn't mean we abandon logic, but to think that you're going to write a letter to your senator and get them to, do the right thing. You're not the one paying them. You're not the one, supporting their campaign. So even if they do see the logic of it, and that's another thing, kind of going off on a different tangent, but because it's election day, I wrote a piece a while ago about how voting is not, whatever your moral stance on it, it's not a way to bring about liberty because of the incentives there. Because what politicians have to sell is really power over other people, decisions over a business environment. They have the power to declare that your competitor is violating antitrust law, for example, or to, declare a certain a building, to enact eminent domain over a building that you can then use for your development. That's the power that they have. That's what political power is. It's power over other people and their money. So you can't, that's what they're selling. If you're not buying that, if that's not what you're in the market for, then that's not the store for you. That's, you're not going to get what you want from people who are selling power over other people. You're not going to go to a politician and say, we'd really like it if you guys, ended the war on drugs, or loosened up your business restrictions so we could start a business, that kind of thing. I actually had a politician basically laugh in my face for suggesting that. That's not what they're selling. That's not the way you win the game of politics. You don't win as a politician by creating freedom. You win by giving powerful people goodies from other people. That's how the game works. And so you're not going to win it. So in the piece that I wrote about this, though, because I mentioned the war on drugs, I do think there are things, the 10th Amendment Center, I think, is awesome, the work that they do, and nullification. Some of those things can be done through voting. Some of those things can be done through like local initiatives. And I used to be very much of the opinion that you just don't participate at all because it's an immoral system, and it is. But I do, especially these last few years, I really do understand the desire to engage in defensive voting. So if there's, because we've had vaccine mandates in California, and I completely I don't think it's going to be very effective in the long run, but I completely understand wanting to vote the people, the legislators who are basically in the pockets of the pharmaceutical companies. I understand the desire to vote them out as a defensive move because they're aggressing against us. So I feel like, when it comes down to where we are now, especially where they're talking about contact tracing and forced vaccines, and you can't get on an airplane without a vaccine or open your store until you've done certain things. The way I see it is the politicians, I'm talking mostly about my state here, but this applies to a lot of places. The politicians of California are waging war on the people living here. And so, what are the weapons I'm willing to pick up to use against that? Am I gonna go and engage in terrorist acts or violence? No, I'm not gonna do that. But am I gonna vote some people out of office? I might. I'm not gonna do it with the illusion that that's gonna solve anything. But I think it's a morally defensive thing to try to do.
But is it even real? I mean, that's the other thing. Like, does voting even mean anything? Like, people are like, every vote counts. I've seen article after article by nerdy libertarian after nerdy libertarian telling me that it doesn't count. I mean, maybe it counts on the local level, but that's the frustrating thing about voting is that people channel all of their hopes and dreams into voting, right? And then they don't think about outside solutions. And now the votes don't even seem to be very real. And also that doesn't take into account, democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner.
That's the bigger issue. This really, is this how, as a society, is this how we want to be making decisions? Everything's up for majority rule. So, okay, well, I think your hair should be shorter. So we're going to have a vote on what to do with your hair. And I don't think people should, it's getting to that point, we have elected leaders now dictating what we have to wear to go outside of our homes. Is that a sound basis for a civilized society to have everything up to majority rule? Or do we want to have things where you have a right to decide what goes in your body? You have a right to live your life and conduct your business as you choose, as long as you're not infringing on anyone else's rights. And we've strayed so far from that it's difficult to even have the conversation. It's one of those unspoken assumptions that, well, of course, we're going to vote, and that's how we, that's how we control our government, and that's how we impact our society. And I think, and that's why, more broadly speaking, I am against voting, not because I don't think it's morally justified in a defensive sense, but because I do feel like it's the opiate of the masses. is a way for people to think that they are making a difference, that they're making things better, that they're getting rid of bad politicians, that they're changing the system, when all they're doing is propping it up. So that's the reason I'm really opposed to voting. I mean, people will say, well, okay, it's not going to do any good and it's not going to bring us liberty, but it can't hurt. It can hurt if you're perpetuating the myth that this is how we change things, because that is a deadly myth.
Do you think there's any hope for the Libertarian Party?
No.
Yeah, I kind of feel similarly. Like, I used to hear about people complaining about the LP when I got into libertarianism. I was like, oh, what a bunch of grouches. And I thought that Jo Jorgensen is fine. Like, I thought she gave me a very nice interview, and so did Spike. But like, they really lack the razzle dazzle. I mean, you look at Trump, and he's a god. Like, it's actually really freakish.
Yeah, he comes off as more of a fringe candidate than they do.
Oh yeah, no, he seems like the radical, like he seems like the badass thing to choose. And Joe is just like, hi guys, I'm Joe Jorgensen. And Spike's like, hey, what's up? And then you got Trump, and he's like a rock star. He's got the Air Force One or whatever. He's got all the people. It's like a party. And I mean, if we wanted to run a candidate that I think could have competed with him just on crazy factor alone, obviously John McAfee is the choice. If you want to out crazy Trump, I mean, we got our own little nutball.
I think the Libertarian Party, I think they need to decide whether they are an educational vehicle or whether they're really trying to win an election. And I think you have to fundamentally misunderstand how electoral politics work, especially at the presidential level. You have to really misunderstand what the incentives are there and how you win that game in order to think that a real libertarian is going to win. That said, I think it's still a platform. It's still a place from which people can spread the message. And Ron Paul, did such a phenomenal job with that without even being on the Libertarian Party in the end. He created a whole movement just by using that platform to spread the message. And the Libertarian Party could do that if they made the choice that that's what we're going to be about. That's our purpose, is to really be committed to the message and use this platform to spread the message, as opposed to, no, we really think we can win this time. You can't, because the game, that's not how you win. That's not how you win. I'm trying to think of a good analogy with board games, but maybe I'll think of one. It's not how the game, it's not how the incentives for the game work. We're not playing with the tools that are gonna win for us, or the weapons that are gonna win for us. So, I guess my only hope for them is that if they decide that, we're gonna go full throttle with the message and really speak for liberty and put a platform out there, because people are always asking me, I'm always saying, well, God, this is screwed up. And they're saying, well, what would you do? And I've written a few things where it's like, okay, well, here's what needs to happen with healthcare. And essentially government needs to get out of everything. But people who are so attached to it being there need to see what that means. I think a lot of people have questions about specifics. And so it's important to address those specifics. So, a party platform is the perfect place to do that. Yeah, get the government out of healthcare immediately, now. Get it out of education. Get it out of national security. Get it out of defense. Get it out of policing. Get it out of everything. And here's how and here's why. It's a great place to do that from, if they decide to do that.
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting 8 years, and I've been making this theory lately. And my theory is that Donald Trump woke up, and I'm not like super Trump fan. I like some things that he does, but for the most part, I mean, give me a break. He's hilarious, but that's, where it ends. I think that Donald Trump has woken up more people than Ron Paul. And I love Ron Paul. Ron Paul is like God to me. And I'm gonna stand behind this, because the amount of people that now question government pre Donald Trump and post Donald Trump, there's a lot of people that are questioning it a lot more. But what I think that he did was he took the righteous anger of the libertarian people, right, all the Ron Paulers, and then he like refocused it back into a state solution. And that's where I think that's where we kind of lose it, right? Because now, I mean, I find myself even cheering for the cops. I mean, when you see what's going on in the streets, I mean, I like kind of like disgusts me when those words come out of my mouth, because I've been very critical of the police. But now I'm like, well, we gotta have law and order. Can't just let these people run around and cause these protests. I mean, what the hell? But these are not the protests of my days. I mean, I had a nice little sign. We were like hippy dippy, and now the protests are basically riots, and I think it's an actual Marxist takeover. So what is going on?
Well, I think so too. And that's, to me, it's just, it's really insidious, and it's really, it's, I'm not sure smart is the right word, because these are old tricks, people have known about these ways of manipulating populations and, for centuries. So, but they still work. And what's insidious about it is that you can take something like a legitimate complaint. I mean, I've been writing about police abuse for years too, and I have been calling to abolish the police. And I think we need a free market solution. We need to get rid of the monopoly on policing. That's the core of it. But that's not what these people are about. That's the abolish the police folks. When you look, you say, oh, that sounds great. And then I look at their actual demands. No, it's not really about abolishing the police. And I also fear that, what's ultimately going to happen is, if you get rid of the local police, there are then going to be demands. In fact, there have already been demands to bring in the UN or bring in some super body to come and be the super police. So what's fascinating to me is the way that legitimate concern, I mean, outrage over police killings and police brutality has been boiling for years now. And so somebody took advantage of that and has derailed that movement, has co-opted that movement into something else. I don't believe that the moms living in, African-American neighborhoods who've seen their kids or other people's kids be murdered by police, I don't believe those moms are supporting this. And I would love to hear from them. I would love to hear from the people in those communities who are really committed to, civilized life and to not seeing their kids murdered by police and to living in peace. I'd like to hear what they have to say, because what's going on now is not furthering that agenda. The riots aren't going to make that happen. And I think a lot of the people in those communities know that. We're not hearing from them.
Yeah, well, they're not really being given much of a platform, and everything these days, because we're so separated physically, it's very hard to get a finger onto the pulse of what other people are thinking about. And we're all kind of in our little silos, and then we have our little Facebook fights, and now we've really done our part to, further freedom.
We've been driven into these little, as much as people seek out their own bubbles anyway, we're now being really pushed into them. And I don't know. And couple that with the extent to which, the media is manipulated by different interests, and what gets to the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, is never going to be something that I trust as being representative of what a lot of people actually think. It's a manipulated, it's a picture that someone wants us to believe. So it's in some ways we are becoming very isolated from each other, and it's hard to know. And now there's this stigma of, if you say the wrong thing, you're going to be labeled, an anti-masker or whatever the group is, or, or racist or whatever it is. These bubbles have become so ironclad, and there's so much fear around, revealing who you actually are and what you do believe, because then you're going to be attacked for not being in the right bubble. It's very divisive, and it's very isolating. And so, I want to think that there are technological solutions to that, peer-to-peer stuff that's growing, certainly, but I don't know. It's not there yet.
Yeah, I don't know either. I feel like I'm reminded of your podcast title. So what then must we do? I mean, I don't have any solutions, and I keep doing these shows and talking with people, and I feel like this year is almost just, it's a good year because it forces you to kind of reckon within yourself kind of things that you haven't resolved. And I think people are still trying to escape from that. But on the other hand, it's a little bit of a lost year, like I can't plan anything. I want to move. I want to,
It's hard to make
do
decisions.
certain things. And I don't know what any of them to, I don't even know where to go. I don't know where there is left to run to. And I don't think that there is a place. I think that we're forced now to have to fight. And I worry about the ability to fight. I had Ian Smith from Attila's Gym, that gym in New Jersey where, he was a rock star. That guy was super cool.
He was awesome.
He's like the most manly man I've ever met. I haven't seen any men that are really willing to stand up and fight. And it seems like him and his partner are fighting back. They've gotten fined over 300 grand by the governor and counting. And not a lot of people have stood up and done anything. And I don't know, like, I feel like everybody needs to take a man pill and kind of be ready. Like, I want more testosterone. Like, lay off the soy, boys. We need to start fighting. Like, this is not the time to be shaming them for their toxic masculinity. Like, let's see some of that masculinity, guys. And it's very, very frustrating, especially because a single woman, I'm just looking around. I'm like, oh, great. I guess I'm just going to like never get a boyfriend because like you're not allowed to interact with people. And all these people are just wusses, and it's really sickening.
You're going to get a better one. You're going to get a better one because the only guys who are going to be worth dating are the ones who are not going to pay attention to that nonsense. So
it's a good disqualifier.
It's a screening device, actually.
Yes, actually, that's true. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? So I live in New Jersey, and I'm obsessed with the Trumpy bear. I know I seem like I love Trump, but I do a little bit, but not mostly. I want to get a Trumpy bear, and I'm just going to hold it in the picture. And then no one who has like a lack of sense of humor will ever swipe right. And then I'll be in good shape because I'll have the Trumpy bear guiding the way.
That's really good thinking. Yeah, I mean, as you said, my whole podcast is about solutions, and yet I'm sitting here going, I don't know. There are a lot of promising things that I see, though, and one of them, I don't know if you've had anyone on your show from the Liberty Cells movement.
No, what's that?
Oh my God, I think this is really promising. So it's nationwide. It might also be worldwide. I don't know, but it's if you go to Liberty Cells, I think it's just libertycells.com. It's about forming local communities, local mutual aid and self-support communities for defense, for whatever mutual aid, the mutual aid societies that were destroyed by the AMA and the insurance companies and the government. It's sort of about rebuilding those. And it's a way for people to get in touch locally and then also to be in touch with others. So like you form a local cell, and then you get in touch with other cells around the country.
Oh, cells, like CELLS.
Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't quite figure that one out. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I would really recommend looking into that. I'm going to try and get someone from them to be on my show. So I do feel like networking right now is one of the best things we can do. And even with my show, I'm not trying to reach the people who are laden with fear and who I have to fight to get through to. I feel like it's really about the remnant. It's about the people who there's a seed there that they already have some desire. They know something's wrong. They know something's deeply wrong. They may not know what to do with it, but they want to do something and they want to connect with other people. I feel like getting those people talking to each other is maybe the most powerful thing, one of the most powerful things we can do, because they're out there. I mean, Ron Paul connected a lot of them. Those people are out there and they may never have been political before. I talked to so many people who, you know, would never have mentioned politics to me before. You know, the lady at the farmer's market or something who now, you know, has to wait every week to see whether the city's going to shut down her stall. All these people who, now that it's hitting home, it's like they do have an inner libertarian, or they do have, I don't even want to call it libertarian, because it's not just libertarians. It's there are some people, I want to call it like the old left. There are people on the left who I think really desire strong communities and people looking out for each other and not being controlled by some central authority. I think there are some people on the left still who are offended by that. So it's not even, I don't want to make it sound like it's, you know, it's our group. It's bigger than that. It's people in what I think in whatever political or religious or non-political or non-religious affiliation who just know that something's really wrong, that it's deeply wrong, and we all need to be talking to each other. I think that's a big, and so Liberty Cells is one. There are other groups too of people connecting with each other. Telegram is awesome. There's some great groups on Telegram of people connecting with each other. But I do feel like, you know, bringing together the people who want to do something, who get that this is wrong at a fundamental level and want to do something.
Yeah, I get worried that they're just not going to let us even cross borders and stuff. You know, I had a friend write me saying, "Oh, you're in Texas, so you're not going to be allowed into New Jersey." And I'm like, you know what? F them. And just everybody's like, lockdown? Well, I guess I got to go stay at home or lockdown. I got to do what they say. Like, I don't even understand. I feel like I'm in Twilight Zone. I do hope that more people can get together in person. It's really nice to see people. And, you know, you go up to somebody and you're like, are we hugging? And they're like, yeah. And you bring it in. Right. And you see your non-masker at the thing. It's like, what's that movie? Hunger Games. You know, you're like, oh, Jay Bird or whatever the sign is.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there is resistance, and I think that that's born in all of us. I think that we're trying to be kind of have that beaten out of us. I mean, every dystopian novel of my youth that haunted me then is coming true. And I'm like, wow, they use this all like, you know, instruction manuals. They really paid attention.
Right.
But I do think that that's an inner fire that cannot be totally extinguished. And I'm happy to be able to talk with you and with other people around the country and know that I'm not alone. Right.
And just that by itself is something, because the psychological warfare that's going on, you know, can really bring people down. You know, that's part of it. I think that's totally deliberate, is to really attack people at a spiritual level and bring their hope down, bring their energy down. You know, and just connecting with other people who, you know, who don't see it their way can be uplifting.
Yeah. Well, I hope we get to meet one day in person. And I look forward to checking out your books. Before we jump off, if you could maybe tell people, I mean, you're obviously getting awesome guests. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about where people can catch up with you and support your work.
Yeah, so my main spot is just my website. It's www.bretigne.com, and of course it's a weird name, so that doesn't help. It's Bretigne, www.bretigne.com. And you can get to my podcast from there. The podcast is What Then Must We Do? You can also find that like on Spotify and all those other places. My books you can find on Amazon until we get kicked off, which, you know, I guess I have to wait for someone there to read them before that happens. This one's for kids and adults. This one's more for adults because there's some graphic violence in there. So I just want to say that. I know I'm probably leaving something out. I write for Lou Rockwell. I write for Fee. It gets picked up on Intellectual Takeout sometimes, but yeah, just my website, Bretigne.com.
Excellent. Yes, and you've got an active Twitter and Facebook feed, so people can connect
Yes,
with you
I
on
do that
social
now,
media
yeah.
before, of course, the overlords tell us that you're unsafe.
Yeah, I mean, you can go there. You won't be able to see my posts, but you can go there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope we meet again in brighter, more free times. And
Yep.
in the meantime, hope you and your family stay safe this holiday season, and I'll speak with you soon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond. Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. We gotta think and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show. Thank you for listening to The Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Moroz Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. You are listening to The Tatiana Show. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on The Tatiana Show is intended as financial advice, legal advice, or really anything other than entertainment. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're listening to us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on or of any sponsors or any affiliate products you may hear about on this show.